Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features Jim Lee's WildC.A.T.s, that's Covert Action Teams, #1, cover dated August 1992. So this is Jim Lee's first title from the Image stable of comics, of which he was co-founder. And what's interesting about this comic is cover dated August 1992. This came out the same month and would have been on the racks with X-Men, Adjectiveless X-Men, that is, number 11, which is also cover dated August 1992. And I always thought it canny of some of the Image co-founders that the title of their new comics placed them right next to the titles they had previously been working on. So with Todd McFarlane, you have Spawn right beside Spider-Man. Eric Larson, you've got Savage Dragon right beside Spider-Man. And in the case of Jim Lee, you've got WildC.A.T.s right beside X-Men on the racks. And then similarly with Whilce Portacio, you have Wetworks also going to be right beside Uncanny X-Men on the racks. So I always thought that that was interesting. Also looking at the cover here, obviously the characters are simply posing for us, the readers, and it is our introduction to the look of these characters. And something I thought at the time was that they were quite analogous to a number of X-Men characters that Jim Lee, of course, had been working on and was famous for working on. So I always felt that Warblade was an analog to Wolverine, that Spartan was an analog to Cyclops, in particular the design of his costume here. That Zealot was very obviously an analog to Psylocke, Grifter to Gambit. And then Maul in the background there, something of an analog mix between Strong Guy and Beast, I felt. And then I did think that these characters were a little bit more original. That is, Voodoo here doesn't really have an analog in the X-Men, I think, unless it's something like a mix between Dazzler and, I don't know, maybe Jubilee a bit. And then Jacob Marlowe here, the Imp, or Emp rather. He's kind of an original looking character in a way. And then we have Void there in the background, and you know, she kind of fits the position of teleporter, what Illyana Rasputin Magic was for the New Mutants, and what Gateway was for the X-Men during the Outback era. But a pretty nice cover here, and you get more or less a clear look at all the characters. Also, one final note that this issue, I got it signed by Jim Lee when he was in Dublin in 2007, so pretty happy with that. So let's open this one up. I was at the time disappointed that Jim Lee had left the X-Men. I would have preferred had he continued on that book, but I was excited for this comic when it came out. And I did buy it off the racks immediately I could. Interesting here on the inside cover page, you've got a little letter from Jim Lee talking about his time in comics to date. He makes the point it is 6 years and roughly 2,000 pages ago that he broke into the comics field. He talks about how enthralled he was by comics as a child. And he talks about how he created his first professional quote-unquote comic book submission in the summer of 1986 entitled The Wild Boys, involving an espionage agency called International Operations. The co-writer of that work was, coincidentally enough, Brandon Choi, who's the co-writer and co-creator here with Jim Lee of WildC.A.T.s. And Jim had just gotten out of college with a medical degree and was spending a year, well, this is something I know he doesn't talk about it here, but he spent a year, he argued with his parents to give him a year before continuing on with postgraduate work to try and break into comics. And of course he did in the fall of 1986. And so pretty interesting here what he says in this note, and how some of those ideas he had back with Brandon Choi when they were children have found their way into this particular comic. So the creative team here, Jim Lee, co-creator, writer and penciler, Brandon Choi, co-creator, writer, Scott Williams, inker, Mike Heisler, letterer, Joe Rosas, so Jim Lee hiring Rosas off of X-Men here as colorist. And also interesting to note, Image was an imprint of Malibu Comics, and they had access to Malibu's digital coloring technology. So we've got Digital Chameleon here as the color separator. So we're moving into the era away from hand separated color guides to computer separated colors. And you can see greater blending and gradation of color with this new technology here in the summer of 1992. So the story starts in the past, in the Antarctica, a little bit of kind of John Carpenter's The Thing informing this little scene here. Interesting to note that this lead character, the doctor investigating this crash site of what he says might be a Soviet satellite, is named McCoy. And we will get a call back to that a little later in the issue, in fact on the last page. But actually, while I'm thinking about it, I do want to point out something here in the small print, WildC.A.T.s Covert Action Teams #1 of 3. Now it did turn out to be a 4-issue miniseries, or the story. This story took 4 issues to conclude before Jim Lee made the decision to go on with a 5th issue. So originally planned to be 3 issues only, and that just gives you an indication of the degree to which some of the Image founders were a little bit cautious and conservative about whether their new venture would be a success or not. Now, of course, it did prove a success, and Image Comics still around today, and a pretty powerful comics publisher in the current market. So I just want to draw attention also, while I'm thinking about it, that we have a little caveat here. Any similarities to persons living or dead is purely coincidental. Now, I'll question that when we get to the last page of the story in this issue. And also, one other thing I do want to note before continuing with the story is there is here on the cover no reference to the Comics Code Authority. So this is not a Comics Code Authority approved comic. And we'll also see evidence of the little bit of extra license that allows Jim Lee as a creator, and also how maybe this is more of a PG-13 comic than some of the comics equivalents at Marvel might have been at the time. So into the middle of this scene arrives this mysterious figure, who later on, of course, we discover is Void, and she is warning these people about this object here, this MacGuffin, the orb. Give me the orb, you do not comprehend its power, give it to me before it's too late. So what's all this about? A little mystery for another day. And then we're moving into the future, which is the present of the reader, August 9th, 1992, and the International Operations Crisis Control Center. There's been some damage done in Georgetown, and basically Lynch here orders that there be a media blackout about it, and he's getting information here that indicates that 2 rogue cats duked it out in the middle of DC. So we're going to see what all of this was a little later on in the issue. And then Void makes another appearance, and she is here desperate, saying, no, not when we were so close. So what is all of that about, and what is she referring to? And now finally we have a splash page and a title for the story, Resurrection Day. And we have here a person that turns out to be Jacob Marlowe. And we have a little homage by Jim Lee to David Mazzucchelli's Born Again in Daredevil. And we have interesting narrative captions here about kind of placing our character, Jacob Marlowe. For nearly 3 decades, he's wandered across America, a lost and homeless soul. Now, this is August 8, 1990. The Great Society failed him in the 60s. The Me generation ignored him in the 1970s. The Reaganomic yuppies persecuted him in the 1980s. As the new millennium approaches, Jacob Marlowe remembers little of his past and sees little hope for his future. His only escape from the hopelessness of reality is to sleep in a country built on dreams. Interesting little kind of quasi-political commentary there on American culture and politics. Not the kind of thing you would get normally in a Marvel or DC Comics title. So again, a little hint that there's a little bit more freedom for the creators here in Image Comics. And then we pull back from that tight panel on Marlowe's head, and here we have an explicit shout out to Mazzucchelli, these Mazzucchelli candies, and also we've got a box of cast off X-Men #1s, the Magneto cover, which of course was the last cover to be released and the one that sold the least, but paradoxically, or maybe it makes sense, is the one that's worth the most today of the 5 X-Men covers. It's the Magneto one. So here we pull back, and Marlowe is asleep. He's got no shoes there. His clothes are ripped and torn in an alleyway, and of course these two guys come along to rob him, and he lashes out at them defensively and discovers that he's got some strange energy type power here. So this guy here cracks him with a bat, and this guy's getting ready to stab him, and then our mysterious female figure appears, warning, by killing him you jeopardize the survival of mankind. So how could this homeless person be important for the survival of mankind? A little building mystery at the opening of the story. So what about the artwork here? Good storytelling from Jim Lee, but kind of pulling back on backgrounds here. And something to recall is that the last 2 issues of Adjectiveless X-Men that he did, he was of course co-plotting those and drawing them, but he was drawing around 16 pages, so he pulled back on the page count for those last 2 issues. And during that time, he was working on this. He was working on the design of the characters, the story, and drawing the story. So on some of these pages, we're going to see less than full backgrounds, obviously to do with the pressure of trying to produce those last 2 X-Men comics, and also an issue 1 of his new creation, WildC.A.T.s. So here we get an anchor image of Voodoo, and we have her explaining to Marlowe that she's called Void, that she's come for him. He was once the Lord Emp, one of the 4 lords of power, the champion of mankind. The Cabal has once more ascended to power on this world and threatens humanity. The powers that be, whoever they are, have sent me to prepare you for the coming war. So she invites him, and we see his perspective up, looking at her. Take my hand, Marlowe, you shall suffer no more. Trust me, your life shall never be the same. So he does, and he smiles there. And I like this upshot on Voodoo here with the foreshortening, with her hand in the foreground and kind of the upshot of her head in the background. So there is some nice art here, but it's not the most inventive of art by Jim Lee. And again, I think that has to be explained by the fact that he is under some pressure trying to get those last couple of X-Men issues out and this first issue of WildC.A.T.s. So then today it is New York City, August 8th, 1992. So there's some bouncing around with time, but we're the day before Lynch looking at the damage in Georgetown. So now we're going to run up to that in the remainder of the story. No more time jumps in what follows. And we've Marlowe once again sleeping in an alley surrounded by other homeless people. He's got some empty bottles there beside him. He's obviously been on a major binge, and he emerges from his drunken stupor, gets knocked by this yellow cab. I like this scene. It's kind of like comical, and also some nice drawing there of the taxi with the taxi driver's arm out and waving his fist at Marlowe. And you know, here's a little indication of the lack of the Comics Code authority. So you know, Marlowe's walking up to this building and he's greeted by the doorman. Top of the morning to you, Mr. Marlowe. And Marlowe says, my ass. So you can read it there. It is at and the dollar signs. You would never get that in a Marvel comic at this time. So these kinds of things, these little differences in terms of the kind of license here in this new company, I noticed at the time compared to the Marvel comics. So then he goes up in the lift. I like this scene. This is nice comics work here, starting on the lower floor, going all the way up to the 35th. We're going up to the penthouse here, and we have him getting groomed, shaved, I like the detail of the cucumbers on his eyes, and he emerges at the top on the penthouse, a completely new man, fresh for the morning. And so we have here Void standing, and she says to Marlowe, "You seem particularly jovial this morning. Any special occasion?" And he says, "Just celebrating the fact that I'm a zillionaire CEO. So this is in the space of 2 years now, instead of some anonymous stiff in Potter's Field." And she says, "It was not your destiny." And he responds, "I love it when you talk like that." So this building they're in is the Halo building, and I love the little detail here of the curve, this architectural detail of this curve, indicating a kind of a halo on top of the building. And you can see it here in this shot as they look out in silhouette, and there's his desk and chair on a cityscape of Manhattan, and we've got the Twin Towers there still standing down in lower Manhattan. So we have a little bit of discussion here regarding Marlowe. He's not been able to access his power since then. Void isn't able to explain that. And then she talks about this dream she's been having, the same dream as always. And it involves being locked in mortal combat with a mysterious man, this man here, who covets an orb of great power. I believe this orb is a conduit for a kind of cosmic energy beyond our wildest imaginings. So this is our MacGuffin here from back at the beginning of the story. And he attacks her with it, and it rips her apart into kind of shards of existence. And we learn that for an instant, time and space stand still around her. She's lost in planes of existence, from the past immemorial to the future imponderable. She sees her death and rebirth, her discovery of Marlowe, converging timelines and their moment of nexus with our reality, and the fate of the future hangs in the balance. Now this is a nice page by Jim Lee here. This would have taken him a little bit of time here to put this one together, and a nice spotting of blacks, and kind of a memorable anchor image here of Void exploding with whatever this energy is emerging out from. It seems like a metallic shell that she's wearing, because we don't know what exactly her costume is, what we think is a costume at this point in our knowledge of her. So she says that our only hope is to use this foresight to alter the path of the future before the critical moment in time occurs when she might die. Now, so they go down to a lower floor, it seems, of the Halo building, and here we've got this vehicle, this jet, which we learn is called the MIRV, the MIRV, but we don't have an explanation of what that stands for just at this moment. And again, I remember reading this at the time and thinking some of this reminded me of the X-Men setup or the Avengers. Like, this is kind of like the Blackbird or the Quinjet. And this guy here, of course, Spartan, reminded me a lot of Cyclops' team leader. And then we've got these two characters arriving in with Warblade being thrown through this wall here, and then Maul arriving. And we get a kind of a sense that Maul, if he grows too big for his brain, he loses control and becomes way too powerful. But we don't really learn much about what Warblade's deal is at this point in the story, or even by its end. So basically, Marlowe and Void head off for an appointment while he orders Spartan and the rest to clean up the mess. And now we switch scenes to our antagonists in Chesapeake Bay. And we have this kind of submarine vehicle, Behemoth, it's called, silently navigating the depths towards the Potomac River. So interesting. Then we're in, and why is it the case that, you know, whenever a cabal of villains meet, they always have a nice sit-down dinner? And of course, we have our head villain at the head of the table, and he's looking out at the river. And then we have this memorable scene, and again, this is something that really indicated to me at the time that, again, no Comics Code authority here. So this guy Pike takes one of these Cabal members. It's heavily hinted he's a mafia boss, Cassini, and pushes his face into his plate of spaghetti here, and basically kills him that way. But also a little detail here with Helspont, who's the leader. We still haven't got a good look at him. And he says, once upon a time I paid a man 30 silver pieces to betray his own mentor. How much did the gnome pay you, Alberto? So this is Cassini here. So a little kind of hint there that Helspont has been around a long time on Earth, maybe 2,000 years. A reference to paying Judas to betray Jesus there. So that caught my attention at the time when I first read it. So here we have this 3-panel scene of Pike killing Cassini. And then we get a nice anchor image of Helspont here. And an interesting design because Jim Lee, of course, fresh off his Ghost Rider crossover with the X-Men. And the reason that there was the crossover with Ghost Rider at the time was Jim Lee wanted to draw Ghost Rider. And to my mind at the time, this guy he's got something of the Ghost Rider look about him. So again, kind of an analog look going on there. In terms of character design, I felt at the time, and other people have observed that Pike looks a bit like Deadpool in terms of his character's design, kind of Jim Lee riffing on Liefeld's design tropes in respect of the design of Pike. And we don't learn who this person is or some of the other people around the dinner table, but we do learn that this character is called Providence. And she has a bead on the one that Helspont is seeking. She has the sight, she says. If she's turned by the cherubim, then reunification itself is imperiled. So Helspont wants reunification of Daemonites, and they need Voodoo, the one with the sight, in order to make that happen. Now, in every one of these first issues, we had these inserts, these cardboard inserts of what would be trading cards, but you'd have to cut them out yourself. So this one is of Voodoo. I'm going to turn it around for you to see. And the reverse is Spartan. And you did learn from these some bits of information regarding the characters, like that Spartan's real name was Hadrian 7. Age unknown, height 6'6", 6'6", weight 240 pounds. And then a little bit about his abilities. He has the ability to harness the biomolecular energy within his biosynthetic body. So he's a synthetic person. Not only can he convert this energy into devastating bioblasts, but Spartan can also create protective plasma shields. He was built by EMP to become the combat leader of the Wildcats. And then we learned that Voodoo's real name is Priscilla Catane, that she's 18, that her height is 5'8", weight. Empowered with the sight, Voodoo is a pivotal player in the balance of power between Daemonites and Cherubim. In addition, she has the power to manifest animalistic forces within her, and the power also projects an aura of animal attraction with which she can hypnotize any hapless admirer. So that was interesting, that you would learn a little bit about these characters via these inserted cards. But it did make kind of turning the pages of the issue a little bit awkward. So, there's always a downside to things like that. Maybe it would have been better to come bagged with the cards inside, like X-Force number 1. But maybe that would have been more expensive than this kind of choice here. So then we switch scenes to this meeting between Marlowe and Void and the gnome. So we get a view of the gnome here. And look, this guy, doesn't he look a bit like the guy from Void's Dreams? Yeah, you can imagine this being this guy disguised, yeah? And so he has information from Marlowe, a gifted one whom the Cabal most desperately wants, one who possesses a very special power. He doesn't want money for the information regarding the location of this person. He wants a favor. So Marlowe grants him the favor on his word of honor. And then we switch to Georgetown and the Spot, and we remember earlier the devastation in Georgetown, so we know that's coming. And this is a nice little sequence of, well, it turns out to be Grifter entering this strip club. Again, no Comics Code Authority approval for this issue. And coming through the beads here, this is a nice little detail here. And into the club, the exotic dancing going on. And it's interesting what we learn. Last time I was here, first person narration, like like Punisher in the Punisher War Journal, or Wolverine in his issues, or Batman in Dark Knight Returns. Jim Lee, an admirer of Dark Knight Returns, and of course worked on Punisher War Journal, and he's using that device here with Brandon Choi. And we learn a little bit about Grifter, something surprising. The last time he was there was in 1972, right? And that it was a quiet dive for company spooks and operators who came down here to unwind and get away from all the crap at Langley. It was the hotspot during the Cold War. Cold War's over. He says, Sister Zealot found me here, took me away from that. So who's Zealot? Why does he call her sister? And he says he became an operator in her own little war. Job's still the same, but this place has changed. So this character, we later on would learn his name is Cole Cash, the Grifter rather. How can he look as young as he does, even though it's 20 years since he was last in that spot? He should be in his mid-40s, but he isn't. And the bartender, or the owner of the club, who recognizes him, makes the point. Make sure you can see all of that on screen. He says, Cole, good Lord, man, you still look like a punk kid. And Cole says, clean living, bud. But it's not. It's something else is going on in relation to the Grifter staying young. So what could that be? So it's a little mystery for readers, and we'll get the answer to all of that in due course. And then, of course, we have this anchor image here of Voodoo, and the coloring makes her quite dark-skinned on these pages, but I think it was a kind of a saturation issue because she's a little lighter skinned in other pages of the book. And we learn from Grifter that she's using those, but unconsciously, those animal magnetism powers. It's hooked the crowd, and then trouble arrives in the form of this Amazonian figured woman and these two goons with her. So she says, take her quickly, that's Voodoo, but be on guard, the Grifter or Zealot may be nearby. If she resists, kill her, allow her to escape, and your lives are forfeit. So they're looking to abduct her. If they can't do that, they're going to kill her. So not much in the way of backgrounds here, notice. So again, I would say at this point, Jim Lee is up against a deadline where he's got to get this book to the printers, but there's still some nice work on these pages, nice storytelling. I like this upshot of Voodoo. I like the way she's backed off there in horror. With her sight, she can see that this guy is really a Daemonite alien, and these guys just act really cruelly in respect of the crowd, shoot them, kill them to achieve their objective. And then Grifter decides to get in the action. And a nice little detail here too, where this woman calls out to Grifter, hey, you're Shaft, aren't you? Do something. And this is interesting because already at this point you're getting from the co-founders of Image an integrated universe. They're trying to replay the old Marvel trick of Stan Lee's and Jack Kirby's and Steve Ditko's, where they had a unified universe where the Fantastic Four and Spider-Man and eventually the Avengers and the X-Men all shared the same comics universe from the beginning. And that's what we're getting here at Image as well. And I think it was a good idea. And it gave a sense of depth to these new characters and this new universe from the beginning. So it was a smart move on the part of the co-founders and creators of the first books. So these goons anyway activate their flash suits, and we're going to see what that is here. So they've got these battle suits. Grifter explains here that they'll only last for 15 minutes, but it'll give them the firepower of a freaking battalion. Great anchor image here of Grifter shooting both of his guns. Got a color hold on them indicating how hot they are with the amount of bullets or rounds rather he's firing off. And so he goes for headshots on these two guys. And again, you know, this is another indication of the lack of the Comics Code Authority. Again, more of the integrated universe. This newscaster made her first appearance in Spawn. So we're seeing her here in WildC.A.T.s. and this is a transition device to get us to the Halo building, and Spartan and Marlowe and Void, who are monitoring the news, see that something's going on in Georgetown. Hadrian makes the point it must be the Cabal, and so Void says, we have to be there. Is the team ready? And Marlowe is, shut up, I'm thinking, I'm supposed to be the leader here. So kind of an interesting little bit of characterization for Marlowe, that he's a little bit conflicted, and he is maybe a little bit kind of insecure regarding his role as overall leader. He's no Professor X, let's say. So back in Georgetown, we have the fight continuing between this member of the Coda and Grifter, and we have him slipping out a little concealed snub-nosed gun here, pistol, and he shoots her in the gut. And so quite a violent image, but pretty cool too. And then the fight escalates, so he grabs or he offers Priscilla his hand here, and we get a quotation from Terminator 1, if you want to live, follow me and do exactly what I tell you. So Voodoo is bewildered. She's asking questions all the time about what's going on here with these guys in battle suits, and the Coda and how she's still alive, how she could have survived a shot to the stomach. And then this is really cool. This was and remains a cool anchor image of the WildC.A.T.s teleporting to the back alley. So yeah, very nice here with Spartan falling towards the ground, Mole here with Marlowe on his back, and then Warblade here with his metallic talons outstretched. Pretty cool stuff, but we haven't really learned anything about what's going on with him, what his powers are. It's clear more or less with the others. And we get more about Maul. If he gets too big, he's not able to think. And then we have Warblade slashing the Coda warrior again in the guts. And more fighting on these pages. We've got Hadrian using one of his bioblasts here. That's pretty cool. And then the guy in the blast suit gets the drop on Marlowe. And here we've got Grifter lining up for a headshot, thinks he can make the shot. Void is worried, and somebody else solves the problem from behind with what looks like a blade boomerang type thing. Cool ad here for Cyberforce #1, and here we go. So we've got a double page anchor image of Zealot. Very nice, practically a pin-up, yes. Make sure you can see all of that, and clearly Jim Lee taking his time over this one, although there's not much going on in the background, but it allows the digital colors to sing. And so Marlowe here, thankful for the save, but wondering how does she know who he is. And he says, little buddy, Grifter says, Sister Zealot believes she knows everything. Sometimes I even believe it. So last 2 pages. I always liked this image here. I like the use of white background there. It is clearly saving Jim Lee on drawing any backgrounds on this page. There are none except this most basic wall here. And so, but we get like a side profile of Zealot. We get to see more of her costume there. And it is a pretty cool designed costume. And then we have Voodoo asking for explanations. Zealot saying the explanations will come in time, and Marlowe suggesting everybody should go back to Halo. And then this woman, this Coda woman, she is really tough to kill, still alive, and she hits a suicide device, and then everything blows up. So quite the anchor image here of the devastation of the back alley and the building, everything blowing up. Cool stuff. And then we're back at the point of Lynch reviewing the footage of the explosion and damage in Georgetown. So our last few panels, very interesting. We've got Helspont here. He's talking to someone in silhouette. He says, the rest is now up to you. and the person says the worst is over, Helspont, with the cherubim dead. That's Emp. By comparison, anyone else by comparison will be small potatoes. Look at how potatoes is spelt. That is a key clue as to who this is, as well as this, the image. Not exactly a perfect likeness, but it turns out to be, well, let's just read the last of his dialogue here. Everything's right on schedule. I'll have access to the NASA security passes within 24 hours. Of course, I'll have to check with Marilyn just to be sure. So this is Dan Quayle. Marilyn was the name of his wife, Vice President of the United States of America from 1989 to 1993. And how does that jibe with that little caveat here, the legal caveat? Any similarities to persons living or dead is purely coincidental. This is definitely Dan Quayle, the potatoes. Those of you who are old enough will remember that he infamously corrected a child's spelling in a school that he was visiting, from TOES to TOS is the correct spelling of potatoes. It is of course the wrong spelling of potatoes, and he has never lived that one down, and it left everybody questioning the man's level of intelligence. Yes. So interesting that, again, something you would not get something as explicit as this in a Marvel or a DC comic in terms of a satirical, I suppose we'd have to say it's satire, a satirical portrait of a sitting vice president, yes? And then here on the last page we have an advert for Wetworks said to be coming in November. It did not. So I do hope that you enjoyed this review and commentary on Jim Lee's Wildcats #1. If you did, please like the video on YouTube, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.